On the quiet edge of known space, far from the busy trade lanes and crowded colony worlds, the research vessel Viridian Echo drifted in a slow orbit around a dead moon. The moon had no name, only a catalog number, Kestros V7, and it was covered in dust, silence, and ruins older than any human civilization. No one had expected to find anything useful there, but Alara Voss, a human linguist with tired eyes and restless hands, had insisted they scan it anyway. Alara wasn't famous. She wasn't even well liked by most of the crew. She spent too much time alone, muttering over strange symbols, drinking cold coffee and ignoring sleep. But she had a gift. She could hear patterns in silence, see meaning in chaos, and when the survey drone returned with a small black shard buried beneath a collapsed stone arch, something in her chest tightened like a coiled spring. The shard was no bigger than her palm. It was smooth, cool to the touch, and covered in markings that shimmered when the light hit them just right. They weren't like any writing system in the galactic database. Not human, not Zenthari, not even close to the spiral glyphs of the long-vanished core. The ship's A tried to analyze it for 3 days straight and came back with nothing but error messages. But Alara didn't give up. She sat at her workstation for hours, rotating the shard in a containment field, tracing the curves and angles with her eyes. She compared the symbols to ancient Earth scripts, Sumerian, Mayan, Proto-Indo-European, anything that felt old, sacred, or forgotten. Most of it led nowhere, but then late one night during a solar storm that made the ship's lights flicker and the gravity plate stutter, she saw it. The glyphs weren't static. They moved, not physically but in how they connected. When the emergency lights pulsed red, the symbols seemed to shift, aligning in ways that formed new shapes. Alara leaned closer, heart pounding. She replayed the sensor logs from the storm. There it was again. A brief harmonic resonance in the shard's material, triggered by electromagnetic interference. It wasn't just writing. It was a key, and it needed the right kind of energy to unlock. She ran a test. Using the ship's comms array, she sent out a low-frequency tone based on the resonance pattern. The shard glowed faintly, and for a split second, one symbol lit up like a star. Alara gasped. She wrote it down, a sharp angular mark that looked like a bird in flight or maybe a falling leaf. She called it Keth. Over the next week, she built a crude decoder. She used Old Earth poetry as a reference, not for meaning, but for rhythm. She noticed that the language didn't rely on grammar the way human tongues did. Instead, it used emotion, memory, and intent as its foundation. A single symbol could mean grief, beginning, and starlight all at once, depending on how it was spoken or felt. This wasn't just communication. It was something deeper. Meanwhile, far beyond the reach of human sensors on a world made of crystal and twilight, a woman stood on a high balcony overlooking a sea of silver trees. Her name was Lyria, and she was one of the last of her kind. Elf-like beings who had watched the galaxy turn for thousands of years. Her skin was pale like moonstone, her hair long and silver white, and her eyes held the weight of ages. At her feet lay a small dragon, no bigger than a wolf, with scales the color of storm clouds and eyes that burned like embers. His name was Kalen, and he had been with her since he was a hatchling. Lyria had spent her life guarding secrets. Not treasures or weapons, but truths. About the universe, about time, about the language that once shaped reality itself. Her people called it the First Tongue. It was said that the architects, the beings who wove the fabric of existence, spoke it to bring stars into being and give breath to worlds. But the language was dangerous. If used without understanding, it could unravel what it had built. For centuries, the First Tongue had been silent. The last known speaker had vanished during the Great Sundering, and the shards that held its script were scattered across the void. Lyria had searched for them but never found one. Until now. Kalen lifted his head suddenly, nostrils flaring. A low rumble came from his chest. Lyria closed her eyes and reached out with her mind, not through technology but through the old ways, the threads of resonance that connected all living things. And there it was, a whisper, faint but clear, echoing from a distant star system, a human voice speaking a single word of the First Tongue, Keth. Lyria's breath caught. She opened her eyes wide with shock and something like hope. "They found it," she whispered. Kalen stood, wings half spread, tail twitching. He could feel it too, the ripple in the cosmic weave, the stirring of something long asleep. Back on the Viridian Echo, Alara didn't know she was being watched. She only knew that the shard was changing her. Every time she studied it, She dreamed of vast libraries made of light, of cities floating in nebulae, of wars fought not with guns, but with words that could erase time. She woke each morning with new symbols in her mind, as if the language was teaching itself to her. She tried to tell Captain Reyes, the ship's commander, but he dismissed her. "You're reading too much into static, Voss," he said. "We're here to catalog minerals, not chase ghost languages." But Alara couldn't stop. She felt a pull, like a song only she could hear. One evening she played the resonance tone again, this time adding a human word. Remember. She didn't know why. It just felt right. The shard responded instantly. It dissolved into a cloud of glittering dust that hung in the air, then reformed into a three-dimensional map. Stars, planets, and lines of light stretched across her cabin, showing paths and places no human had ever seen. At the center of the map was a symbol she hadn't seen before, a spiral with a dragon coiled around it. Beneath it, in shaky human letters that appeared as if written by an invisible hand, were the words, "The war begins again." Alara stared, frozen. She didn't understand what it meant, but fear and wonder twisted together in her chest. She reached out to touch the map, and the moment her finger brushed the light, a vision flooded her mind. She saw a battlefield under a black sun. Armies of shadow fought against beings of pure light. In the distance, a woman with silver hair stood beside a dragon, speaking words that made the sky crack, and then silence. The vision vanished. The map collapsed. The shard was gone. Alara sat on the floor, shaking, tears on her cheeks. She didn't know what she had unlocked, but she knew one thing. This was bigger than her, bigger than humanity, and someone or something was coming. On Silthera, Lyria turned to Kalen. "We must go," she said. The dragon nodded, his eyes glowing brighter. With a beat of his wings, he summoned a vessel made not of metal but of woven starlight and ancient song. It hovered above the balcony, humming with power. "The humans have spoken the first word," Lyria said, stepping aboard. "Now they must learn the rest before the Hollow Ones return." And as the ship shot into the sky, leaving trails of silver fire, the stars themselves seemed to hold their breath. After the shard vanished, Alara could not sleep. The vision of the battlefield under the black sun haunted her. She replayed the map in her mind over and over, trying to remember every line, every symbol. The spiral with the dragon still burned behind her eyes. She knew it meant something important, but she had no one to ask. The crew thought she was losing her mind. Even her closest friend on board, a botanist named Leela Cruz, gave her worried glances and brought her extra rations, just in case you forget to eat again. But Alara did not forget. She remembered everything. She spent her days in the ship's archive, pulling up every record she could find about ancient myths, lost civilizations, and unexplained signals from deep space. Most of it was nonsense. But one file caught her eye. A report from a long-dead survey team that had once picked up a repeating signal near the Kestro system. The signal wasn't code. It was music. Soft, slow, and sad, like a lullaby for a dead world. The team had dismissed it as cosmic background noise. Alara downloaded it. That night, alone in her cabin, she played the recording. As the melody filled the room, she whispered the word she had spoken before. Keth. The moment the sound left her lips, the music changed. New notes appeared, harmonizing with her voice. The air grew warm. The walls seemed to breathe. And then, the language began to speak back. Not in words, but in feelings. She felt sorrow for a world that never was. She felt joy for a sunrise that happened 1 billion years ago. She felt the weight of a promise made before time had a name. Tears rolled down her face, but she did not stop. She kept speaking, testing sounds, matching them to the emotions that rose inside her. Slowly, a pattern emerged. The first tongue was not built on nouns or verbs. It was built on truth. Each sound had to come from a real place inside the speaker. If you lied even to yourself, the language would not respond. That was why no machine could translate it. It needed a heart. Alara practiced for days. She learned that Vire meant to heal, but only if you truly wished to mend something broken. She learned that Soln meant to remember, but only if the memory was honest. And she learned that Drain meant dragon, but also guardian, fire, and loyalty all at once. Meanwhile, far away, Lyria and Kalen traveled through folds of space that human ships could not see. Their vessel, called the Moon Thread, moved not by engines but by song. Lyria sang the old paths into existence, and Kalen's breath kept them stable. They passed through nebulae that hummed with forgotten names and past stars that flickered in time with the first tongue. Kalen could feel the human's voice growing stronger. "She learns fast," he rumbled, his voice like stones grinding deep underground. "Too fast," Lyria replied. "If she speaks the war words before she understands their cost, she will tear reality apart." "Maybe she is meant to," Kalen said. "The architects did not choose our kind to carry the tongue forever." Lyria said nothing. She remembered the last time someone had spoken the war words without wisdom. Cities had turned to dust. Oceans had boiled away. Time itself had cracked like glass. She would not let it happen again. Back on the Viridian Echo, Elara made a breakthrough. She realized the map had not just shown places. It had shown moments. The lines were not routes through space, but through time, and one line pointed directly to Earth. Not as it was now, but as it had been 10,000 years ago. That was impossible. Humans had no records that far back, but the language insisted it was true. She tried to tell Captain Reyes again. This time she played the changed music and showed him her notes. He listened, arms crossed, face unreadable. When she finished, he sighed. "Elara," he said gently, "you're brilliant, but this isn't science. It's poetry. And poetry doesn't power starships or feed colonies. But what if it could?" she asked. He shook his head. "I can't risk the mission on a dream." That night, Elara made a decision. She would not wait for permission. She recorded everything, her findings, the sounds, the meanings, and sent it in a tight beam transmission to the Interstellar Archive Council, the largest knowledge repository in human space. She addressed it to Dr. Maya Ellis, a xenohistorian known for studying dead cultures. Maya had once written a paper on how myth preserved truth longer than data. Elara hoped she would listen. 3 days later, a reply came, not through official channels, but through a private channel masked as routine maintenance traffic. It was short. "Send proof." "Not theory. Proof." Elara knew what she had to do. She waited until the ship passed through a dense plasma cloud, a natural source of the same energy that had first activated the shard. In the heart of the storm, she stood in the observation deck, where the hull was thin and the stars were bright. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and spoke a phrase she had pieced together from her dreams and feelings. "The sky remembers what the ground forgets." The words hung in the air like sparks. Outside, the plasma cloud responded. It swirled into shapes, trees, faces, rivers, all glowing with soft blue light. The ship's sensors went wild. Alarms blared. Crew members ran to the windows, stunned. On the deck below, Lila watched a dying fern in her lab perk up. Its brown leaves turned green. New buds formed in seconds. She touched it, trembling. "Elara," she whispered, "what did you do?" Elara didn't answer. She was watching the sky. The shapes were forming letters now, human letters but written in starlight. They spelled one word: listen. At that moment, light years away, Lyria felt the resonance like a bell ringing in her bones. She gripped the railing of the moon thread. She spoke the binding phrase, she said, voice tight. "She's not just learning it. She's becoming part of it," Kalen growled low. "Then we are out of time." On Earth, in a quiet office filled with books and data slates, Dr. Maya Ellis stared at her screen. She had just received Elara's final message, a video file. In it, Elara stood in the storm, speaking words that made the air shimmer. Then came the footage from the plasma cloud, the fern in the lab, the starlight writing. Maya had spent her life chasing echoes of lost worlds, but this was not an echo. This was a voice, alive, real. She stood up so fast her chair fell over. She called her supervisor, her voice shaking. "Cancel my leave. Alert the council. We have contact, not with aliens, but with something older. Something that shaped them all." But even as she spoke, she knew words would not be enough. She needed to see it herself. 2 weeks later, a fast courier ship detached from the main archive fleet and jumped toward the Kestros system. On board, Maya Ellis held a single data chip, the complete works of human poetry, from ancient hymns to modern free verse. She didn't know why she brought it. She only knew that if this language was built on truth and feeling, then human art might be the only bridge they had. As her ship flew through the void, Elara stood once more on the observation deck. She could feel something coming. Not danger exactly, but change, the kind that reshapes everything. She whispered another phrase, one she had just understood. The door is open, and far above, in the silent dark, A ship made of moonlight and dragonfire dropped out of fold space, its arrival marked not by noise but by the sudden blooming of silver flowers on the hull of the Viridian Echo. Flowers that should not exist, that had no seeds, no roots, only beauty. Alara looked up, and for the first time she did not feel alone. The arrival of the silver ship sent shockwaves through the Viridian Echo. Alarms blared. Not because of weapons or shields, but because the vessel had appeared without warning, without energy signature, without sound. It simply was, hanging in space like a thought-given form. Its hull shimmered with patterns that shifted like living ink, and from its side, a ramp of woven light extended toward the human ship's airlock. Captain Reyes ordered all hands to battle stations. Weapons officers locked targeting systems. Engineers sealed bulkheads. But Alara ran the opposite way, toward the docking bay, heart pounding, not with fear but with certainty. She knew who was coming. Lila tried to stop her. Alara, wait. We don't know what that thing is. I do, Alara said, breathless. It's the answer. Before anyone could argue, the airlock hissed open, and there she stood, tall, pale, with eyes like frozen starlight. Lyria stepped onto the metal floor of the human ship. Her long silver hair moved as if underwater, though there was no wind. Behind her, coiled low and watchful, came Kalen. The dragon was smaller than Alara had imagined from the vision, but his presence filled the room. His scales shifted from gray to deep blue as he scanned the humans, and his tail flicked once like a cat sensing danger. The crew froze. Some raised weapons. Others backed away. But Lyria did not flinch. She looked past them all straight at Alara. You spoke the binding phrase, she said. Her voice was soft, but it carried like a bell through stone. You opened the door, Alara swallowed. I didn't know what it would do. Few do, Lyria replied. But you felt it was right. That is why you were chosen. The word echoed in Alara's chest. She had never thought of herself as special. Just stubborn, maybe a little too curious. But standing before this ancient woman and her dragon, she felt something shift inside her, like a key turning in a lock she didn't know existed. Captain Reyes stepped forward, hand on his sidearm. Identify yourself. State your purpose. Lyria turned to him, and for the first time her expression changed, not to anger but to sorrow. I am Lyria of Silthera, last speaker of the first tongue, and I am here because your kind has awakened a war that never truly ended. Before he could respond, a new voice cut through the tension. Stand down, Captain. Everyone turned. In the corridor behind them stood Dr. Maya Ellis, still in her travel coat, data chip in hand. She had arrived only hours before, but news of the silver ship had reached her fast. She walked past the stunned crew and stopped beside Alara. I've read everything she sent, Maya said, eyes fixed on Lyria. And I believe her. Lyria studied Maya for a long moment. Then slowly she nodded. You carry old songs in your hands. That is wise. Maya glanced at the chip, surprised. You can sense that? The first tongue hears all truth, Lyria said, even when it is silent. With that, the tension broke. Captain Reyes lowered his hand, though he kept his eyes sharp. He ordered the crew to stand down but remain alert. He allowed Lyria and Kalen to stay aboard, for now, under strict observation. Over the next few days, an uneasy alliance formed. Maya and Alara worked with Lyria in the ship's main lab, while Kalen curled near the door, eyes half closed but always watching. The dragon did not speak often, but when he did, his words were heavy with meaning. You think in lines, he told Alara once as she tried to map the language's grammar, but the tongue thinks in circles and breath. In silence between heartbeats, Alara learned fast. With Lyria's guidance, she began to understand that the language was not just a tool, it was a living memory. Each word held the echo of those who had spoken it before. When Alara said "Vire to heal," she felt the hands of healers from 1,000 worlds pressing through her own. When she whispered Soln, she saw flashes of lives long gone. Lovers parting, children laughing, stars being born. But Lyria warned her. Do not speak the war words. Not yet. They are not like the others. They do not ask. They command. And reality obeys. Meanwhile, strange things began to happen across human space. On the colony world of New Haven, a ruined temple, long thought to be just old stone, began to glow at night. Farmers reported crops growing in perfect spirals, matching the symbols Alara had recorded. On Mars, an ancient underground chamber, sealed for centuries, opened itself without force, revealing walls covered in the same shimmering glyphs. The hollow ones were stirring. Lyria explained it to them one evening, as the four sat in the dim light of the observation deck. Kalen lay at her feet, tail wrapped around his own body. Long ago, she began, the architects made the universe with song. They gave each world a voice. But some voices grew hungry. They wanted to be the only song. They tore at the weave, trying to silence others. We called them the hollow ones, beings with no core, only hunger. They feed on forgotten things, lost names, erased histories, broken promises. And the first tongue? Maya asked. Was the counter song? Lyria said. It could mend what was torn, but it could also unmake. In the last war, both sides used it. The cost was everything. Ilara looked out at the stars. So if we speak it now, you may save us, Lyria said softly. Or you may finish what the hollow one started. Just then, Kalen lifted his head. His eyes glowed bright blue. They are close, he rumbled. On the ship's main screen, a new alert flashed. Not from sensors, but from civilian channels. Across 3 colony systems, time had begun to stutter. People reported seeing themselves hours in the future or past. Buildings flickered in and out of existence. One entire city on Series V vanished for 17 seconds, then returned, but with all its clocks running backward. They are testing the weave, Lyria said, standing, looking for weak points. And they have found one. Where? Maya asked. Here, Ilara whispered. She pointed to her own chest. Me, I'm the weak point. I opened the door. Now they're coming through. Lyria placed a hand on her shoulder. You are not weak. You are the hinge. And hinges can turn either way. That night, Ilara could not sleep. She sat alone in the lab, staring at the empty space where the shard had once floated. She thought of all the words she had spoken, all the feelings she had poured into them. She thought of the battlefield under the black sun. And she thought of Earth, her home small and fragile in the vast dark. What if she could protect it? What if she could do more than protect? She reached for her notes. Not the translations, but the raw sounds, the hums, the breaths, the silences between. She began to weave them together. Not as a sentence, but as a shield. She focused on one idea. Keep safe. Not just people, but memories, stories, the quiet moments that made life worth living. As she whispered the new phrase, the air around her shimmered. A soft light formed a dome over the ship, faint but steady. Kalen, who had been sleeping in the corridor, opened one eye. He felt it, the first true defense spoken in the first tongue in 10,000 years. In the morning, Maya found Ilara asleep at her desk, head resting on her arms. The light was gone, but the feeling remained, a calm, steady hum in the walls like a lullaby. She's learning, Maya said to Lyria, who stood in the doorway. Or remembering, Lyria replied. But their relief was short-lived. Later that day, a priority message came through from Earth Command. It was urgent, coded, and terrifying. Over the Pacific ruins, an area where ancient human cities once stood, time had collapsed. A patch of ocean had turned to desert, whales swam through sand, and in the sky above a black sun had appeared just like in Ilara's vision. The war had returned, and it was starting on Earth. Ilara stood up, face pale but determined. We have to go back, Lyria nodded. The final thread is there. The place where the first architects first spoke. Maya grabbed her bag. Then we go together. Captain Reyes argued, of course. He said it was too dangerous, that they didn't understand what they were dealing with. But when he saw the footage from Earth, the black sun, the twisted time, he fell silent. Finally, he gave them clearance, not as a military mission, but as a last hope. As the Viridian echo turned toward home, and the moon thread matched its course, Ilara stood at the viewport, watching the stars blur into streaks. Kalen joined her, his warmth a quiet comfort. Will it hurt? She asked him softly. Speaking truth always does, he replied, but silence hurts more. And far ahead, on a broken world called Earth, the Hollow Ones waited, hungry, patient, and ready to erase everything. The journey back to Earth felt longer than it should have, not because of distance, but because time itself seemed unsure how to behave. As the Viridian echo and the moon thread flew side by side through the outer rim of the Sol system, strange ripples passed through space. Stars blinked out for seconds at a time. Comm signals twisted into old songs or childhood lullabies. Once, the ship's chronometer showed 3 different times at once. Inside the lab, Maya worked tirelessly. She had brought with her the full archive of human poetry. And now she tested each piece against the resonance patterns Ilara had recorded. To everyone's surprise, certain poems, like Whitman's Chants of Life or the haiku of Basho, created tiny pulses of stability in the air. They were not as strong as the first tongue, but they held echoes of the same truth. That beauty and feeling could shape reality. Human art is a cousin to the first tongue, Lyria said one evening, watching Maya recite a line from a Civil War letter. Not as powerful, but just as honest. Meanwhile, Alara trained. Under Lyria's watchful eye, she practiced speaking short phrases that carried intent without command. She learned to wrap words in care, not force. Kalen often sat beside her, his presence grounding her when the language threatened to pull her too deep. He taught her to breathe between syllables, to let silence do part of the work. The tongue is not a hammer, he told her. It is a hand. Sometimes it holds, sometimes it lets go. As they neared Earth, the distortions grew worse. Over the Pacific ruins, the black sun hung like a wound in the sky. It gave no light, only shadow. Beneath it, the ocean had turned to cracked earth, and ancient buildings rose from the sand. Not as ruins, but as they had been thousands of years ago, whole and humming with forgotten energy. People who wandered too close vanished or returned, speaking languages no one recognized. Earth Command had sealed off the entire zone. Drones sent in never came back. The few survivors described voices in the wind, calling names that had not been used in centuries. When the ships entered orbit, Alara felt a pull in her chest, like a thread tied to her ribs. The first tongue was strongest here. This place, this broken piece of earth, was where it began. They landed not in a city, but in a dry riverbed near what was once California. The air was still. The sky above them was half blue, half black. The black sun did not move. It watched. Kalen led the way, his claws clicking softly on stone. Lyria followed, her eyes scanning the horizon. Maya carried a small device that recorded emotional resonance, something she had built from old archive tech. Alara walked last, hands trembling but voice steady. They found the source in a crater shaped like a spiral. At its center stood a stone arch, identical to the one on Kestro's V7 but 10 times larger. It glowed with the same symbols Alara knew by heart, and around it the ground shimmered like water. "This is a wound in time," Lyria said. "The hollow ones are feeding on it." As if in answer, the air grew cold. Shadows peeled away from the rocks and rose into the sky, forming shapes. Tall, thin, with too many limbs and no faces. They made no sound, but their presence drained warmth, hope, memory. One drifted toward Maya, and she gasped as her hands grew numb, her thoughts foggy. "They steal what makes you real," Kalen growled. He leapt forward, wings flaring, and breathed a stream of blue fire. Not hot, but bright with pure chronoton energy. The shadow shrieked silently and dissolved into smoke. But more came. Dozens. Hundreds. They poured from the arch, drawn by the presence of the first tongue. Alara knew what she had to do. She stepped into the center of the crater and began to speak. Not a war word, not a command, but a lullaby. She wove together sounds she had learned. Vyre for healing, Soln for memory, Drain for protection, and shaped them into a song of return. She thought of her mother's voice, of Lila's laughter, of the fern that had bloomed in the lab. She poured all of it into the words. The ground stopped shimmering, the shadows slowed. Lyria joined her, voice low and ancient, adding depth to the song. Maya, recovering, began to recite a poem. "Do not go gentle into that good night," her voice shaking but clear. And Kalen circled above, his breath sealing the edges of the wound, keeping the hollow ones from spreading. For a moment, it worked. Then the black sun pulsed, a new shadow rose. Not from the arch, but from the sky. It was larger, darker, and it carried a voice. Not in words, but in absence. It spoke by erasing sound, by making silence so heavy it crushed thought. Alara fell to her knees. The song broke. "It is the hunger-made flesh," Lyria cried. "The last of the hollow kings." The creature drifted toward Alara, reaching with hands that were not hands. She felt her memories slipping, her name, her home, why she was here. Panic rose in her throat, but then Kalen landed beside her. He lowered his head and touched his forehead to hers. Warmth flooded her. Not just heat, but feeling. Loyalty, courage, the bond between guardian and friend. "You are not alone," he whispered in the first tongue, "and you are remembered." Alara took a breath, and she spoke one word. Keth. Not as a question, not as a guess, but as a promise. The word exploded outward like a star being born. Light, real golden human light, poured from the crater. The black sun flickered. The hollow king screamed a silence so loud it cracked the stones. Lyria raised her arms and sang the oldest verse, the one that named the architects. Maya shouted lines from every poem she knew, weaving human hope into the ancient song. And Ilara stood, tears streaming, and spoke the phrase she had made on the ship. "Keep safe." The arch flared. The wound closed. The hollow king shattered into dust that turned to rain. When it was over, the black sun was gone. The sky was blue. The ocean returned, gentle and slow, washing over the sand. The ancient buildings faded like dreams at dawn. Ilara collapsed. Kaelin caught her before she hit the ground. Later, as the four sat by a small fire made of dry wood and dragon warmth, Maya looked at the stars. "We did it," she said, voice hoarse. "Not yet," Lyria replied. "We only healed the wound. The war is not over. It never is, but we gave it a chance to rest." Ilara leaned against Kaelin's side, exhausted but calm. "What now?" "Now," Lyria said, "you teach others. Not just the words, but the heart behind them. The first tongue must not be hidden again. It must be shared with care, with wisdom." Maya nodded. "The archive will help. We'll build a new school, not for weapons, but for understanding." Kaelin rested his chin on his paws. "And I will guard it," he said simply. As the fire crackled and the waves whispered against the shore, Ilara looked at her hands. They were just human hands, small, scarred, ordinary, but they had spoken a language that mended time, and that she knew was enough. For now the stars burned steady, and somewhere deep in the dark, the universe listened. In the weeks after the black sun vanished, Earth began to heal, not all at once but slowly, like a bruise fading. The Pacific ruins returned to ocean. The strange crops in New Haven fields grew normal again. Clocks ticked forward without skipping. People who had lost hours of their lives found their memories returning in quiet dreams. No one spoke of the Hollow Ones in public. Governments called it a temporal anomaly. But those who had been close to the edge knew the truth. Something ancient had almost ended everything, and humans, with help from a silver-eyed woman and her dragon, had pushed it back. Ilara did not return to the Viridian Echo. She stayed on Earth in a small house near the coast, not far from where the arch had stood. The house had no high-tech walls or security drones, just wood, windows, and a garden that Lila helped her plant. Maya visited often, bringing books, data chips, and news from the archive. Lyria and Kaelin remained too, though they did not live in the house. They stayed in a grove of old redwoods, where the air hummed softly with the first tongue's echo. The work began quietly. Maya used her influence to create a new branch within the Interstellar Archive, the Covenant of Voices. Its purpose was not to collect knowledge, but to teach how to listen. She gathered poets, musicians, historians, and even children who still spoke their grandparents' lost languages. They met in open fields and quiet rooms, learning that truth could live in a lullaby as much as in a law. Ilara taught them the first words. Not the powerful ones, not the war words, but the gentle ones. Vire to heal a broken trust, Soln to honor a forgotten name, Drain to stand beside someone in fear. She showed them that the language was not about control, but connection. Many struggled. Some gave up, but a few, like a young boy from Mars who whispered Keth to a dying bird and watched it fly, understood. Lyria watched from the edges. She did not teach often, but when she did, her words carried the weight of ages. She told stories of worlds that had fallen because they spoke only to command, never to care. She warned that the Hollow Ones would return, not as monsters, but as silence, the kind that grows when no one bothers to remember why kindness matters. Kaelin became a quiet guardian. He flew over the Covenant's gatherings, his presence a calm reminder that protection did not always mean force. Children left him offerings of shiny stones and wildflowers. He never ate them, but he always bowed his head in thanks. Then came the final test. It started with a signal, not from deep space, but from the ruins of an old human colony near Alpha Centauri. The colony had been abandoned after a reactor failure a century ago. Now its dead comms array had begun broadcasting a single phrase in the first tongue. The phrase was simple: "I am alone." Ilara knew it was a trap. The Hollow Ones had learned. They were no longer just erasing. Now they were mimicking, pretending to be lost, hurt, in need of rescue. If someone answered with compassion but without wisdom, they would open a new wound. Maya wanted to send a team. Lyria said no. "This is not a rescue," she said. "It is a choice," Ilara agreed. "They want us to speak without thinking, to act from pity, not truth." So they prepared. In a clearing beneath the redwoods, the four gathered. Maya brought the full archive of human songs. Lyria wove a circle of silver leaves that glowed with old power. Kalen stood at the center, wings spread, ready to burn away any false echo. And Ilara stood before them all, calm and clear-eyed. She did not speak the phrase they expected. She did not say, "You are not alone." That would have been kind, but it would have been a lie if the voice was not real. Instead, she shaped a new verse, one that asked, not assumed. She spoke, "If you are true, show your name. If you are lost, show your wound. If you are hunger wearing a mask, be gone." The words traveled faster than light. They did not fly through space. They unfolded in the space between heartbeats, in the silence after a breath. On Alpha Centauri, the signal stopped. For 3 days, nothing happened. Then a new message came. Not in the first tongue, but in broken English from a human survivor. Old, scared, half-mad from decades alone. He had found an old shard in the ruins just like Ilara had. He had tried to speak, not knowing what it was. The Hollow Ones had used his voice like a puppet. But Ilara's question had broken the mimicry. Truth had cut through the lie. A rescue ship was sent. The man was brought home. And the shard he carried was sealed, not destroyed. Because now humanity knew how to handle it. After that, the Covenant grew. Not as a secret, but as a promise. Schools opened on Earth, Mars, Ceres, even on distant colony worlds. They did not teach the first tongue as a weapon or a tool. They taught it as a mirror, showing who you were when you spoke. Ilara never became famous. She did not want to. She preferred mornings in her garden, afternoons teaching a few students, evenings listening to Kalen hum old songs under the stars. Lyria stayed with her, not as a teacher anymore, but as a friend. Maya traveled the stars, building bridges between species with poetry and shared silence. One evening, as the four sat by the fire, Maya asked the question she had held for months. What happens when the next war comes? Lyria looked at the flames. We speak, and if we are not enough? Kalen lifted his head. Then we make room for those who will be, Ilara smiled. She picked up a smooth stone from the ground and whispered a single word. Remember. The stone glowed faintly, then returned to normal. But anyone who held it later would feel a warmth, and for a moment, they would know they were not alone. That was the real victory. Not the battle won, but the bond kept. Years passed. The Covenant became part of life like air or water. Children grew up knowing that words could heal or hurt, build or break. They learned to speak with care, and in the quiet places of the galaxy, other voices began to answer, not in fear, but in hope. The architects were gone. But their song lived on, not in monuments or machines, but in the simple act of saying "I see you" and meaning it. And high above, the stars burned steady, not as distant lights, but as words in a story still being told, one true voice at a time.